Good afternoon from London and Masa al Khair to people in Palestine. My name is Noor Masalha. I'm a Palestinian academic based in London for many years. We in the Palestine Book Awards are celebrating the 10th anniversary of the awards this year. The Palestine Book Awards celebrates the achievements of writers from across the world in writing about the Palestine and its people, the indigenous people of Palestine. To mark this milestone, we are bringing together authors, publishers, friends, and also past winners of them. And we are excited to have with us a previous winner of the Palestine Book Award from 2015, Dr. Lena Jayyusi, a leading Palestinian author. We will be discussing Lena's 2015 book, Jerusalem Interrupted, Modernity and Colonial Transformation, published by Interlink, and again won the accolade of 2015. Lena, can I ask you to hold the book just to show it to our audiences?
Of course. It's a book.
Okay, looks great. Thank. Let me say a few things about Lena. Lena, for many years you have been, you were a professor in the College of Communications and Media Sciences on the Dubai campus of Zayed University. You are retired now, if I'm not wrong. You have published many works, including an article in a book I edited on oral history of the Palestinians. You have published on a range of issues on media and cultural studies, film studies, memory, visuality, the Palestinian national identity, discourses of international law on Palestine, also the various Gaza wars. If you don't mind, I will mention your mother, Salma Khadra Jayyusi, a friend of mine. She's probably one of the best known translator of Arabic literature into English from Arabic into English. Lena, you have actually followed her in her footsteps, trying to fill in her big shoes. And you also translated a famous Arab folk epic. It's called Adventures of Saif bin Yazan.
Correct, yeah.
Which I love this story, this epic. We're not going to focus on the adventures of Saif bin Yazan this evening. We will be focusing on your excellent collection, Jerusalem Interrupted, Modernity and Colonial Transformation. Can I ask you to introduce this book?
Yes, of course. The book is, well, let me talk about the basic premise of the book. The basic premise of the book is that at the beginning of the 20th century, Palestinians, Palestine as a whole, but specifically in Jerusalem, was seeing an emerging indigenous modernity. And when I say indigenous modernity, what I mean is that it was both a modernity, a set of projects that had in view the development of the needs of the local indigenous population and their aspirations, and that it was to be implemented, of course, by indigenous practitioners, politicians, leaders, educators. So this modernity, however, was aborted through the combined policies of the British Mandate and then, of course, and the Zionist takeover that was fostered by it. So the book is in two sections. The first section is on practices, institutions, and the history of Mandate Jerusalem, covering various facets from photography, painting, music, the press, health practices. I have a couple of chapters on Sheikh Jarrah, as it was, because when I was doing it, Sheikh Jarrah was already facing an assault on its Arab character. So I wanted to put that in. There were sections on the women's activism, childhood in Jerusalem, various topics like that. Section 2 is transformations of space and place after 48. And so it's a shorter section, but it includes several emblematic cases of transformation, of intentional transformation of Palestinian areas into Jewish ones. Dalbiya in West Jerusalem, that was occupied in 48. And then, of course, the Jewish Quarter in 67. The takeover of the St. John's Hospice in East Jerusalem, and so on. And it also has a couple of chapters on the end giving an overview of the history of the conflict, a more sort of international relations overview of the history of the conflict in and over Jerusalem, plus a more visionary final essay on what the future and how a spatial reorganization and a reorganization of rights might look like to make the city habitable, cosmopolitan, egalitarian in the future. So that's the book.
Brilliant. Let's actually leave the second part of the book, which is the Nakba and the post-Nakba period, the Jewidization of the neighborhoods of West Jerusalem. Let's actually focus on the first part of the book, which is the late Ottoman period till 1948, the British period or the mandatory period, or let's also call it the British colonial period, when Jerusalem is actually the capital of Palestine, the heart of Palestine. It's got the most important institutions. It's got the leadership of Palestine based actually in Jerusalem. It's got the best colleges. It's got the Arab College, the elite college of Palestine, which is almost became a university in 1946, 48. It's got some of the best schools in the country, if you like, a private school, public school, some of the best hospitals, but also it was a city which is what you call, and I very much agree with you, a highly interconnected city, i.e. it wasn't just Jerusalem. It was Jerusalem and the towns we know nearby, Beit Lahem, Beit Sahur, Beit Jala. It was dozens of villages. By the way, writing a new book on education, I noted Jerusalem had actually a sports day, which actually included a sports day for the whole area, which included all the villages around Jerusalem. And some of these villages were destroyed in 1948. But there were dozens and dozens of villages around Jerusalem, East and West Jerusalem, which were connected to Jerusalem. So it was a city which is highly connected, interconnected, at the heart of throbbing city, at the heart of Palestine, and certainly one of the most cultured or most developed, perhaps actually economically, socially, and culturally, if we're talking about music, if we're talking about even people from Egypt who came to perform in Palestine. Some of the famous Egyptian singers actually and theaters actually came to Haifa, Jaffa, but also came to Jerusalem.
Absolutely.
So this was really a cosmopolitan international city, open city, interconnected city. And I just want to press you on this period of the British colonial period. It is a colonial period, but at the same time, it's also a period of also some positive developments actually in Jerusalem. Expansion, we have the Arab College, which was a leading college in the country. So we have museums in Jerusalem. It's a colonial period, it's a British period. You have the British control, we have the British censorship, but at the same time, you have a city which is thriving, expanding. We have new Arab neighborhoods like Talibiyya and Al-Baqa. A lot of some of these wealthy Palestinian neighborhoods, in fact, were developed during the mandatory colonial. This is the paradox of British colonialism in Palestine, that there was a lot of expansion, the emergence of middle classes. At the same time, the British sat on top of the Palestinian society and tried to control it politically. The British tried to, yeah. Go ahead.
It's very interesting because in a number of the chapters, you will see this tension, this paradox, that of course there was the project of developmental project of the colonial empire, Britain, in Jerusalem, in health and education and other ways. But of course, there was also the indigenous one. And increasingly, you will see a set of tensions. First of all, a lot of Palestinian leaderships had to work together and benefit to some extent from various colonial administrative developments, but they were in tension with it. And as you said, exactly, that's the point. You find this paradox in many colonial situations where the leaders and the elites work together with, but are often also resisting or subverting or doing things in excess of what the colonial strategies might be. And you see that typically in Jerusalem. And many of the chapters kind of, show this, in fact. And, but you also see the tensions and the difference in the ways of dealing with these things as between the elites and the working classes. You see the class also issue does emerge in a number of the chapters. And I think this is a very important one, dimension to kind of see. And the third thing you also see is that increasingly, although Jerusalem started off as you say, it's a cosmopolitan city in many ways, but one aspect of this cosmopolitanism was that it started off with a very, very diverse ethnic, social, religious fabric. And people lived together, they consociated together. Mm-hmm. But increasingly, again, as we saw, and of course, after 48, that was utterly ruptured. You see an increasing polarization, tension, and conflict, certainly between the three main groups, the British, the Palestinians, whether Christians or Muslims, and the European Jews mostly.
Absolutely.
There are paradoxes that I think are very important to trace, and you can only see them when you have detailed descriptions of and analysis of these different institutions, whether in the Palestine Broadcasting Corporation, for instance, or in the health sector, or as you say, in the in education. You saw. I mean, there were schools which had both Jews and Arabs.
Absolutely, yeah.
Tensions, and there were also kind of collaborations, and that increasingly became fraught.
Absolutely, I think this is a brilliant point. I think Khalil Sakakini actually talks about when he set up his school, the Dystouria School, in 1908, I think. In fact, he had Arab, Muslim Jews and Christians in his school, and Jews actually went to these Arab schools. And that's something we don't actually realize now, that Jews in Jerusalem, before Zionism, before the rise of Zionism, in fact, actually there were Jerusalemites, they were part of us. Palestinians, in fact, identify themselves as Christian, Muslims, and Jews until the arrival of Zionism. And the whole thing was actually disrupted and never interrupted. Let me just press you on the question of the Palestinian leadership during the mandatory period. In the 20s, as you say, some of them collaborated with the British to keep things going. But gradually, with Zionist immigration, with land purchases, with the colonization of the country, they had no choice. But in fact, when we look at the 1930s, the Palestinian uprising actually started among the peasantry, wasn't the leadership, it wasn't, in fact, it actually began in the countryside. And it began in the triangle between Haifa, the Galilee, and Jenin and Ya'bad, in these areas which were affected badly by colonization and Zionist settlements. In fact, it was peasants-driven uprising, and the leadership in Jerusalem had no choice but to follow. And this is where we have the clash between the British and the leadership in the 30s, not in the 20s, but it was really the peasants. It was an uprising from below, led by peasants and led by dispossessed Palestinians. And the Palestinian, if you like, the elite leadership or the aristocracy in Jerusalem, in fact, had no choice but to follow, the peasants. But it's quite interesting, this kind of collaborating, but also resisting the British when it comes to the elite leadership or the Palestinian urban leadership, the notables, what we call.
The notables, but there was just, I mean, the leadership, what we talk about as the Palestinian leadership was itself very variegated. Perhaps there was just one party that was explicitly, clearly nationalist at the time, the Istiqlal Party.
Yeah, yeah.
And they had organized the strikes and a lot of the work, but you're absolutely right. It was from the bottom up that the uprising took place. But the forms, there were forms of collaboration and there were forms of co-working. There, kind of, I make a distinction. There was some collaboration. There's some ways where you work through the institutions, but you were subverting them, or you were kind of making, covering up your tracks, or there's a whole lot of different modes of subverting and resisting that were employed, apart from the open ones, which you saw in the uprising and also in the fate of some of the leadership during the 30s. When we were imprisoned. And
that's right, yeah. I remember actually an excellent essay by Thomas Aboud. Is it Aboud?
Aboud. Yes, I mean in Arabic you would say Aboud. It's
Aboud, Thomas Aboud, okay. It's about the bombing of the King David Hotel based on experiences of some of the Palestinians, actually, the accounts of some of the Palestinians. This was based on oral history, testimonies of individuals?
Well, he was focusing on, I think he might have mentioned it, and he did the thing on the transformation of Talbiya, and he might have talked about that because the bombing was, I think, a critical factor in the in what happened in the western parts of Jerusalem and the kind of fear and panic that ensued there.
That's right. I mean, coming to 1948, the Nakba, the disruption, I mean, you call it interruption, but it was really disruption. It was rupture. It was traumatic.
Rupture, yes.
It was traumatic. I mean, when we read the diaries of Khalil Sakakini and his home in El Qatamon, for instance, actually, and the way he left the library, his library was actually left there. And Zionist forces came and actually looted the library. And some of these great Palestinian libraries were in fact located in some of these wealthy areas of West Jerusalem, like Al-Talibiyya, like Al-Baqa, like Al-Qatamon.
Absolutely.
And his diary shows how traumatic actually was this. Now we have several neighborhoods completely wiped out in 1948, from El Musrara to El Qatamon to El Baqa, and the Israeli elite actually after 1948 settled in these areas. Al-Talibiyya became the Israeli prime minister residence actually in 1940. Some of the elite of Israeli society actually loved these Palestinian houses, major houses, beautiful houses. They're still there, by the way.
Yeah, and in fact,
most of them are still there.
They're the most expensive, and when they're advertising, they want to sell or rent Arab house, and it's
that's right. But it's amazing how the Israeli political elite after 1948 just moved into these Arab houses in the Talibiyya and Qatamon and Baqa, and they became favorite for these intellectuals. Even some of them were Israeli authors, and I think Martin Buber actually moved into one of these Arab houses there, the philosopher of the Hebrew University. So 1948 is the turning point, and it's also the entire villages of West Jerusalem also were wiped out. There is a big fight about Lifta now, and we'll come back to this issue of resistance later on, but it's quite interesting how the destruction of these villages was also a process. Some of these villages were destroyed just in 1948, but this destruction continued into the 50s. And some of these beautiful villages like Ein Karim and Karim, what they call, they're still there actually. You can go there.
Yeah, and it's been the site of multiple waves of Jewish migration.
That's right, yeah.
Kurdish Jews at other times, it kind of changes.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, these changes continued there. I mean, I actually remember Ain al-Karim from the 80s when I was a student in Jerusalem. We used to go there, and you can still see the mosque and the church and the Arab houses still kind of more or less the same. And I think these villages, the story of these villages in West Jerusalem hasn't been written yet in terms of how important these villages were to Jerusalem. And now, of course, the Palestinians are focused on East Jerusalem. So the ethnic cleansing of West Jerusalem and the villages in East Jerusalem was almost total, really. Very few of them survived. I think Bet Safaf was the only village which survived in 1948 and was split between Israel and Jordan. But otherwise, apart from Bet Safaf and Abu Ghosh, another village, dozens and dozens of these villages were wiped out. So the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, when we talk about the ethnic cleansing of Palestine in 1948, in Jerusalem was also very much clean slate, clearing systematically. Now, now on the question of what's happening actually since 1948 or perhaps since 1967, is the way the Israelis try to expand East Jerusalem eastwards, i.e. the Israeli approach was to try to separate Jerusalem from the rest of the West Bank and also to separate it from Beit Lahem, Beit Jala, and Beit Sahur, but at the same time also expand it towards the settlements, towards Ma'ale Adumim, trying to connect Jerusalem with Jericho, if you like, trying to split the West Bank through Jerusalem. So the Israeli Greater Jerusalem, the Israeli expansion and colonization of Jerusalem is really trying, on the one hand, trying to separate Palestinians in Jerusalem from the rest of the Palestinians by the wall, but at the same time also expanding the city eastwards. Yeah. So in 1948, the expansion was westwards, if you like, colonizing these Palestinian neighborhoods in West Jerusalem. Since 1967, actually, the whole expansion of Jerusalem, the whole colonization, the whole settler colonization of Jerusalem is actually going eastwards.
Well, this separating Jerusalem from the rest of the West Bank is really a precursor to totally Judaizing it. I mean, they're cutting off, and they make it impossible. I mean, for people to stay in the center of life law, that if you're out of Jerusalem for a certain amount of time, or if you live, suppose you have a family outside Jerusalem, or you have work outside Jerusalem, given the walls, given the separation, it enables the Israelis to say, well, the center of life is outside Jerusalem, you lose your residency. Yes. And so it's part of a whole set of instruments to Judaize Jerusalem. But then, of course, they are expanding eastwards because they also have the plan to appropriate more and more the West Bank. And they do that also through connecting the settlements and turning every area, every locale of the West Bank into a little enclave. And so it's a very multi-pronged strategy. They're unfortunately brilliant strategists, but they only get away with it because of international support from the US and Europe.
Absolutely.
That's the only reason why they get away with such blatant practices of oppression. And
it's the complicity. It's really the complicity of governments. Absolutely. In the West, actually. So we're talking about colonization, which is expanding eastwards, but also they are also penetrating these major neighborhoods, such as Silwan, such as Sheikh Jarrah. The most recent uprising was in Jerusalem, in Sheikh Jarrah, and it was local Palestinians who are putting up the fight. It wasn't Palestinian leadership, it wasn't Palestinian Arab leadership, it wasn't elites. It was really ordinary people took up the fight. And to move up to the issue, we can't talk about colonization without talking about resistance, in fact. I think resistance and colonization go hand in hand. and the resistance and the two uprisings, the two intifadas since 2015, in fact, were in Jerusalem, were about Jerusalem. So we had the one focusing on Jerusalem 2015, and we had also the March, the May uprising this year, which also started in Jerusalem, about Sheikh Jarrah, and it did expand to the rest of Palestine, including Gaza, including the Galilee. For the first time, we have Palestinians everywhere joining in. Is the way the Palestinian issue unites everybody and connects everybody. And suddenly we have Palestinians everywhere, including within the Green Line, joining in the fight.
It's a qualitative turn. It's a qualitative turn. It doesn't come out of nothing. It doesn't come out of nowhere. There's been resistance in all these locales all this time, including inside 48. I mean, organizing and resisting of various forms. I think there was, many months ago, a sort of great protest movement in the Arab towns, the Palestinian towns inside 48, about the amount of crime that was being allowed to be perpetrated, often by collaborators. But this is a qualitative term. And I think what was particularly interesting here is that, or what was particularly important in the mobilization of agency across the whole land of Palestine, as well as solidarity from abroad, is the fact that it was about concrete issues with concrete goals. That helped. You see, save Sheikh Jarrah. Sheikh Jarrah, like Silwan, have been subject to assault from the early 90s.
That's right, yeah.
Or earlier even. I remember I tried to get a chapter on Silwan for the book, and I had 3 authors. Each of them would say yes, and then they'd pull out. No, unfortunately, but it was already very much in the making. There wasn't much attention paid to it, but it's a combination of things. I think sometimes things come to a head, mature, but the casting of concrete goals, these particular families, the social media, advent of social media also helps. The attack on the Aqsa, which have become very, very extreme.
Increasingly, yeah.
Increasingly extreme. I think that made a difference in kind of bringing people together and making a different kind of...
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Also, I think we need to perhaps highlight, underline that it's not just what they do, but also what we do. Actually, what we do does matter, and it does make a difference. And Palestinian resistance actually does make a huge difference. And it's although it's actually done by local people and they are paying the price. In fact, we can always chip in. We can always support, whether it's financial, whether it's connecting people, whether it's the media, whether it's, so it really, the issue of resistance from below, it's a big thing. Paradoxically, by the way, what the Israelis did is also by expanding East Jerusalem. In fact, they connected all these Palestinian villages together. So in this area, the so-called Greater Jerusalem, we have nearly 320,000 Palestinians living in. This is not, this is just the area the Israelis call Jerusalem, if you like, or Greater Jerusalem, or the so-called annexed Jerusalem. In fact, 320,000, this makes this Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, one of the largest Palestinian cities, actually. I mean, if you think Gaza has got 500,000 Palestinians, El Khalil has got more than 200,000. In fact, East Jerusalem, together, all these villages, which became, if you like, towns, actually, connected to Jerusalem, annexed by the Israelis, but in fact, they are a single unit today. 350,000 is an awful lot of Palestinians in Jerusalem. And I think we need to also think about actually ways how a large number of Palestinians demographically can also make a big difference.
Yeah, the Israelis themselves, I remember reading a report perhaps a couple of years ago that they're losing the battle, a demographic battle in Jerusalem. They're not able to contain the Palestinian population like they wanted to.
That's right, yeah. I mean, I've actually been trying to look at Silwan, for instance. They moved about 500 Jewish settlers, perhaps more than that, and they're taking over Palestinian houses and they're forcing people out. But in fact, Silwan has got something between 50,000 Palestinians living in Silwan. And that's an awful lot of Palestinians living in Silwan. So in fact, you know, our demography is not going one way. It's much more complicated, actually, the way things are happening in Jerusalem. And even some Palestinians from within the Green Line have moved to Shafat and other places. So that mass of Palestinians in Jerusalem, this is something which is a big asset for us, but they also need our support, and they need. There's so many things about this collection. It's a brilliant collection. Also, we can compare different parts of it. We can compare the first part, which is till 1948, with the second part, which is the disruption, the destruction, the interruption, the ethnic cleansing. That comparative approach is important. Also, we can also compare British colonialism with Israeli settler colonialism. I mean, there are people actually who are trying to make that distinction between colonialism as a kind of a project of exploitation, of patronage, of control, as opposed to settler colonialism as a much more lethal, much more ethnic cleansing, much more replacement, if you like, colonialism. So that collection gives us many things to do, actually, and to develop some of these themes. So thank you very much for that. I know we haven't got much time, actually. So I'm going to signal the end of this and to thank you, Lena, for this brilliant. Do you have anything in the pipeline coming up?
Not immediately on Palestine. I have something that might be relevant, but not immediately. But I'm hoping to do some more work on mining some of the oral history collections, of which there are a lot now.
Oh, brilliant! Yeah, that's a big thing also for us. Well, thank you. I look forward to it and to us meeting perhaps in Palestine one day. I also want to thank MEMO and the Palestine Book Awards for this meeting, and also to thank Jihan El-Farra, who technically organizing this meeting. Jihan is from Gaza, a well-known Palestinian family in Gaza, and hope to see you soon in the next meeting. Usually our meetings are Wednesday afternoon. And thank you again, Lena and Jihan, and thank you to our audiences.
And thank you.
I can't see the audiences. I can't see the audiences, but they can see us. And see you soon, inshallah. See you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.